Okay. So I circulate fairly widely in the agent-based modeling community amongst people who, also amongst people who do some teaching of agent-based modelers. And one of my closer colleagues here, who's a quite famous agent-based modeler, he tells me his philosophy is never build a model in front of students. And I don't have that option, you know, in my case. Of course, I just always build in front of students. So this has made me somewhat fearless in terms of these things. Okay, so let's do this, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be several pieces to what we do, okay? And we're going to proceed in putting those pieces into place. But the logical chunk of the work is going to involve a couple things, okay? First, we're going to set up the state chart such that people are distributed when they first get introduced, when they first come into being, whether as an immigrant or when they're born, they're going to be placed in one of these states. They're going to be sorted into these states by what's called a branch transition in any logic. See this guy here? We're going to use that, okay? We're going to sort them into these states. Now, into what state will we assort them? Well, for a given person, we're going to encode to what state they will go, into what state they will be placed. We're going to encode that in another piece of any logic that you folks know very well already, which encodes an assumption and communicates that assumption from the point of creation to the thing. And what is that thing? Parameter. It's a parameter. We're going to encode in what state they will start in a parameter. And from whence will that parameter value be drawn? It'll be drawn from a custom distribution. That's an option list custom distribution, as we did yesterday with sex distribution. We're going to draw in what state they start with a custom distribution. Those three pieces will be the three legs of our tripod out of which we build this. And before the half hour is up, we will have a functioning model, okay? Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So, first step. So, the aesthetics of this are one of the more troubling features to me, in the sense of mumble. I'm tempted to put it up here and divide people up visually because I like my state charts to go top to bottom. But there's a case to be made. It should be a horizontal state chart. So they enter over here and then they're divided up amongst these. Do you folks have a strong preference? Okay?
Not at this stage.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So from the palette, I just detached this weight state chart because we need some space. I moved it up, okay, this entry point. And we're going to add in a branch. And I'm going to use this as a teaching opportunity to teach how you can route connections around too. So I just put into place a branch, okay? A branch transition. Now, coming out of this branch, the branch is going to take care of sorting into what state they go. So there's going to be three things out of the branch. One of them would be the normal and underweight, and that will be the default, hence it's shown in this dotted line. So what did I do? I disconnected this. I added a branch. I then dragged the transition to come from that branch to this state, and I left it as a default transition. It said it's default, and hence it's dotted. Okay? Okay, now we will wrestle it to our will. Unfortunately, any logic, it gets a little bit persnickety sometimes with respect to branches, and it's not a big deal, but you got to deal with the aesthetics. So let me drag this in. It's better than it used to be. Okay, so I'm going to drag this transition in, okay? And I'm going to connect this up to the branch. And ladies and gentlemen, here, I am going to do something I've never done before with a transition in front of you. Are you ready? Okay. Sorry?
Sorry. My transition, I got it.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this transition. And it's going to put in place a handle where I can use to route it. In fact, I'm going to do it twice. And I'm going to copy this sort of put this one to connect with there, and then I can drag these handles around at my leisure. Okay? There we go. Okay. Okay, so something makes me want to frob it a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to come back. This will not be the default, but we're going to come back and fix it up. And next, I want one going to obese. So basically, this is going to divide people up for initial state into their possible states. Is that okay? Okay. And here we go. There we go. Now, you could fault me. Maybe this guy should go over on the left. And it should go like that. In which case, this one should go like that. The aesthetics are imperfect. Okay. So we've got the basic structure in place, but we need some conditions. Okay. So that's adding a branch to let people come in. Now, what the conditions are will be in the branch. That's the rub. And in order to see this, I am going to introduce two things, ladies and gentlemen. Two things will sustain us. Two things will make this triumph possible. Thing one, we are going to introduce an option list. And this option list will be called, it goes into the model as a whole, so we need to go over to this projects window, model as a whole, and we're going to right-click and say New Option List, and this will be called Initial State. And it will have 3 possible values. By the way, this is not the only way to do it. There's a multitude of ways to do this. I happen to find this is the most clean for a couple considerations. Normal, so one will be normal and underweight. Now, no, I want to call it normal and underweight state because I don't want it to get confused with this guy. So I'm going to call it normal and underweight state. So it's a little bit of a different name. Overweight state and obese state. If you have things by the same name, you have to be a little bit savvy, and if you're not sure, just you can call them different names, and then you won't get confused.
What is the option list?
The option list, thank you. Let me go do that again. You go to the projects window, and you go right-click on this. Okay, there's going to be high TA demand in the next 10 minutes, so stay vigilant. Okay, so I right-clicked on this. I said New Option List. Okay, and you will say Initial State, and then for each of the items in there, I will say normal and underweight state, and overweight state, and obese state. Are we okay? Ladies and gentlemen, finish. So now we have an option list. Okay. Now, how did I say I was going to encode and communicate in what state people would start? Using a what? Well, okay, there'll be a custom distribution to pick the values, but even before that, there's a basic construct that encodes assumptions and communicates those assumptions. A parameter indeed. A parameter, ladies and gentlemen, indeed. Okay, so we're going to add to this model a parameter. And this parameter will be called, guess what? Initial state with a lowercase I. Why? Because it has a particular value. For each person has a specific value. Capital I initial state denotes a set of all possible initial states. This will be a particular one. And I would like you to tell me, what do you think its type will be? What possible types of values could it hold? Take a look at the options. An initial state. That's what it is. It's going to hold an initial state, ladies and gentlemen. my mucosal immunity is in overdrive, and I think I'm well past the infectious state, but my throat is just coated with white blood cells, probably, or whatever their analog is for cell-mediated immunity for mucosal immunity, and they're fighting they're looking for the flu wherever they can find it, and so I'm really sort of plugged up there. Okay, so this is initial state. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, initial state. Okay, so this is one of these cases where for now we're going to leave, well, sure, I'll say default value will be normal and underweight state will be the default value if no one specifies it. Okay. Wow. Okay. Okay, Winchell, deployment to Sector 1. Okay.
Could you show your entire canvas?
I'd be delighted to do so. How would I do that in AnyLogic? How would I show this entire canvas? Double click. There we go.
Nate, you have an arrow there.
I do have an error, and I'm avoiding it right now. Because the thought isn't complete yet. This is very standard that in building something up, there's a couple pieces needed, and you'll do the first part, but it indicates an error because it needs something from the second part. So I'll temporarily ignore that error, do the second part, and then I'll fix it up. And this is unfortunately a very common thing where you have things that depend on each other. Okay. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, now what we're going to do? What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? I promised you before the half hour is up a model that will be keeping track of this. What do you think now we're going to do based on these transitions? This will be the default, but there's going to be conditions, ladies and gentlemen, for these two transitions. And you notice that right now it's complaining too many default exits. In other words, there's too many defaults here. I'm saying go to this by default, that by default, that by default. It's saying, well, look, which do you want me to be the default? There can only be one default. So we need to put in place conditions by which it will go to one and versus the others. I'm going to leave the default be to normal and underweight because I anticipate most people starting there. And I'm going to have a condition to go this way, down to obese. I'm going to have a condition under which it will go to obese. And what will that condition be? How did I get there? I went to this. Yes, I hear the right idea. So I went to this. I set condition, and what do you think the condition will be?
Initial state is overweight.
Initial state is, and this one happens to go to obese, so it'll be the initial state is the obese state. Okay, initial state equals obese. Oops, sorry. obese state. Boom. And what do you think the other one will be for overweight? What do you think it will be for this one?
Can we go back just to that one? There's some people still taking this.
Sure.
There you
Oh, man.
Do we need to put names on those ones? Or no?
Yes, it's a good. I was musing about that. Probably I will put names. I'll say like initially obese transition or something like that, and then initially overweight transition. Often I won't show the names for those just because I think it's more confusing for stakeholders, but I like to have names in place for them, so it's just not some opaque name by default. Okay, so what is the condition for this guy? What do I need to do for it? Anyone say?
Initial state is
Yes.
overweight.
Initial, okay, yes, now, ladies and gentlemen, That's right. So in order to do this, I will check it. Okay. Okay. So we will do condition, and this will be initial state equals. You notice I did equals equals. Why is that?
Because it's a convention of Java.
Yes, at a deep levels convention of Java, but it's because I am doing what? I'm testing whether or not it is equal to, rather than assigning to it. I'm not saying make the initial state be overweight. Instead I'm saying is the initial state overweight, and that's what condition expects. Notice this is just determining a value. The value is going to be true or false, a so-called Boolean value. So I don't need a semicolon. If this was assigning to it, which wouldn't make sense here, it will freak out and be unhappy. But if it were assigning to it, I'd need a semicolon. But it will freak out in a unpleasant way. Okay, it'll say syntax error on token. This, please delete the token. A friend of mine was teaching a kid in high school. Actually, I think he may have been in grade school, programming 30 years ago, and he was complaining about the syntax errors he received. It's actually syntax error. He said they keep on giving me stinkaxes, and you kind of feel like you've been hit by a stinkax sometimes. But it's not it's a syntax error. It doesn't know what you mean, and so it's complaining about this semicolon. Okay, so you wouldn't want that. You want this. Okay, are we okay with that? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost done. Almost done. What we now need to put into place is some way of dividing them up. So build. Now we've completed a kind of logical chunk of work within this. And so there should be no errors right now. But we need some way of telling it what state to put it. Are we okay? Okay, now that we're beyond the stinkax error, let's go and divide people up. So what are we going to use? I heard it earlier. What are we going to use to divide people up? A custom distribution indeed. A custom distribution indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? And wheretofore is the custom distribution within the palette? It's in what area of the palette?
Agent.
Agent indeed. It's in the agent subpalette. And there it is, a custom distribution. And let's drag it in. This will be initial weight distribution. Okay? So whither does this go, this distribution? Does it go to person? It goes to
Initial state.
the value drawn from it will go there, but it actually lives, this distribution itself lives most naturally in main, because it's kind of describing not a characteristic of one person, but a distribution to assume for the whole population. Okay, so it conceptually is kind of a characteristic of the population as a whole, not of any one person. So we don't put it in the theory of personhood. We put it, it's an aspect of that population, really, sort of what the distribution is. Theory of personhood doesn't get into details what fraction of people start in what way, just says what the possibilities are, etc. The fraction of people that are divided in a given population into different groups, that's a function of the population, and that lives in main. So it lives as well in main.
Yeah,
Okay?
because you could think of doing different simulations with different
Totally.
starting populations.
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, or you might have a meta population model where you have several cities, each have their own population. In fact, we'll be seeing that, possibly even today. Okay, and see how we can have these different subpopulations. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so here we have an initial weight distribution, and for this is a familiar territory for you. What sort of distribution will it be, do you think?
Options.
Is the options distribution. And what is the option list associated with it? Initial state indeed. And so once again, we specify what fraction of the population we specify in different ways. Now, yesterday I specified as percentages. Here I'll say, you know, 0.6 are normal and underweight, you know, 0.3 are overweight, and 0.1 are initially obese. Is that okay?
What if you wanted it to be an exact number of people? So you wanted like one person to be obese and everyone else to start out as normal in the default?
Yes.
Do you have to do this a completely different way, or?
So
Even
there's several
better
ways
from
to
an
do that.
information point, yeah.
There's several ways to do that. And it is a not uncommon need. Probably I mean, there's a question of sort of pragmatics. What's the easiest way to do it in any logic? Probably what I would do is have a parameters that would actually encode the values, and then when setting up the population, you go through and set up the population of so many people of this type, of that type, and Winchell or Allen or me could show you how you do that. But I wouldn't draw it from a distribution, because a distribution is, you know, is by nature it's associated with a random variable, whereas you're setting it up with a fixed number. But a very common need, and I could certainly show you models that do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Could
Yeah,
you,
that's what.
could she do something like let's say we wanted every one obese person 0 overweight and everybody else normal underweight. Could we define normal and underweight as population size minus one individual?
Yes.
As a function?
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I mean, basically, you'd want to have a. I was just seeing if table functions now support some support for that, but yeah, you know, I'd probably do it with a parameter that said how many people start in each one, and you know, the number of normal and underweight would be the total population size minus the number that start overweight minus the number that start obese,
Yeah.
or minus the sum of both,
Yeah.
right? And then you do it accordingly. The deal is that you wouldn't draw it from a distribution. You would need to put in place a mechanism so you had a block of people who are normal and underweight of this many, and then a block of the next, and there's again a couple ways to do that. I'll show you in just a moment one way you might do it. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, so now to finish the thought, we just defined a custom distribution, and now what do we have to do? Having defined initial weight distribution, what do we have to do in population here for the initial state? Right now, why is it giving that value for the initial state? Where did that come from?
The default.
That's the default we specified. So what we're going to do instead is to do what? Where will we get the value for initial state? We will draw it from this distribution. So that's what we want. We're calling the initial distribution, and that gives us back a value, ladies and gentlemen. This gives us back, this returns a value, okay? Returns some initial state, okay? Yeah, so this is going to give us back some initial state. So we're going to draw it independently. The deal with when you start with a certain number of people, it's not independent of the others, right? Here, the state of each person is posited to be independent of the others. It's just drawn from a distribution. And when you start with a certain number of people, it's not independent. You want, you know, a certain number of this, a certain number of that. Now, one thing you could use is this index thing. You could basically say, okay, for the first so many, they're normal weight. For the next so many, they're overweight. For the next so many, they're obese. And you can use this index to determine, okay, you know, are they in the first 100? If so, they're normal and underweight. And the next 50 are obese. You could do it that way. That wouldn't be, that would have some things to recommend it as well as a way. So I'm not saying you should do this, but if you're really interested in doing that, you could say, you know, if index is less than 100, then we will use, you know, normal. Don't do this this is just me answering this question. If it's less than 100, use this. If it's otherwise, if its index is greater than, or is less than 120, use overweight. Otherwise, use obese or something. You could do it like this. It ain't pretty, and this is why I'm always trying to think, like, what's the most elegant way to do it, and that matters because stakeholders won't be, so turned off by it, and it'll be easier to modify the model and easier for us to work with, less risk of error. So, transparency matters. Okay, so I just called this. Please do not note that you do need these begin and end semicolon. Why do you need those? Or, sorry, semicolon. Begin and end parentheses. Why do you need those?
Because they're transferring a value?
Yeah, it's actually because it's performing yes, in a way. It's actually calling a function. And it doesn't need, it so happens it doesn't need any values to do its work. So normally inside here would be, A, B, C. But in this case, it doesn't need anything to do its work to actually transfer. But you still need to say call it. Call it. If we just put this, it's like saying, okay, what's the initial state for this person? And we're giving it the whole distribution. It says, I need a particular value. I don't need a distribution. This will return a particular value, drawing from the distribution. This is just indicates the distribution, and it's not going to know how to render that into an initial state. It's not smart enough. So we have to call the distribution. Okay, build. And ladies and gentlemen, let's run this thing. And then we'll proceed to the crowning achievement of the morning. Okay? Okay, so here we go. And some people, probably to test this, what could I do? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's a little factoid.
We have a semicolon error.
Oh, great. Okay, Winchell and Alan? Semicolon error?
I have an error.
Okay.
I'm not too sure what it is. Got it.
Okay, do you have a semicolon error too, Vivian?
Yeah, I've got it, because we put it, I think you put it at the end of the initial state equals overweight
Don't
state.
do that.
Yes.
That was just me showing what not to do.
Oh,
So that was in person. I was just showing,
I missed it.
so this guy here.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, you don't want a semicolon there. I was showing what not to do.
okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I was showing why you don't need a semicolon.
Yeah.
Okay? Because just computing a value. This is, in main, this is computing a value. So,
Okay, I was gonna see how I
Okay.
could find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Parentheses. I notice sometimes with dynamic variables you also have
Yes.
parentheses. Is it the same
And
reason?
then this is
Because
build in.
you're
yes.
pulling from that parameter at that
Okay,
point
so
in
you probably
time.
need state on the end of it.
Yeah, so, yeah, you are, it's a great point. And, Vicky, you basically, with dynamic parameters, they function as kind of, they function as functions. They serve as functions. You call them with some information they need to do its job. So maybe, for example, I have a dynamic parameter associated with the birth of a baby deer, which is going to occur 6 months from now. But I provide it some information now to tell it who the mother of the deer is going to be and where it is going to appear, and who the father was, and whether it should start infected. So I provided its information now that it needs to do its job in 6 months' time, and I do that in a function call like syntax. Okay, so in other words, I call it as if it's a function. Yeah, great question. Okay, that's my recollection of them. That yeah, it's a very similar thing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, are we okay with this? You should be able to run it. Now, let's suppose, just life skills here. Maybe what I'll do is I'll